You probably want pineapple on your pizza.
Well, I subscribe to Nyclot's epistemology. This is called vibes-based epistemology. So an agent is justified in believing X if agent gets good vibes from X, and I get good vibes from pizza. Next question.
Are you talking about
no.
Nyclot the pagan? Are you talking about Nyclot the pagan?
Is there another Nyclot?
I mean, I'm just making sure we're on the same page.
Oh yeah, we're on the same page. Yeah.
I don't
There's
think
really
a lot
only
of
one.
the people know the context of that one.
Well, stick around on Discord. The context will enter into a call and go, "Hello, Valerian."
Oh,
Hello, Bubba.
Hi.
So I was talking to ChatGPT the other day. Wait, so do you believe?
crazy, mate.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed all of it. What was the part about morality that you said?
Do you think that there are objective moral facts, stance-independent moral propositions that are true?
No, I'm not an objective moralist. I'm a subjective moralist. They're all dependent on the individual.
Okay. You think that there's moral propositions that are true, it's just that subjects participate in the truth value of it?
Yeah. It's just like, well, that makes it seem like murder is wrong and that the subject determines on how bad the murder is. But I don't think that there is an objective truth about morality. Which is a tough pill to swallow. It's a tough pill for me to swallow, but I think that to be consistent with the way I view the concepts like morality from a psychology perspective, it's one that makes the most sense.
Interesting. Do you know a lot about psychology?
I majored in it. I'm not a
Nice.
genius, but I majored in it.
No, that's good. That's good. I have that in my notes as well too.
This guy's such a this guy's freaky.
All right, let's see. All right, so
Here's an
This
actual
man
part of
has
the answer.
like riz unlike any other.
it's actually pronounced Yaslite, just so we're clear on that. Right?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna add Yaslite. It's pronounced Yaslite. Okay, I'm gonna add this to notes. Doesn't think there are objective moral facts. Thinks morality is subjective. Question mark asterisk. Unsure what subjective means. Okay, what do you take like the difference between something being subjectively true and objectively true is?
So a subjective truth would be subjectively true would mean like true dependent on the individual. Objectively true would mean kind of like a tautology, just like true no matter what the individual says.
Mm-hmm.
So like one plus
When you
one
say
equals-
dependent, like do you just mean that the truth of that proposition is explained by something that it is to be that agent?
the truth of that proposition is to be that agent. I don't know. I mean, it's just like I'm trying to piece together what you said.
I can explain it like a slightly different way. So like when I say like nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, do you take that to be like an objective truth, right? Like it doesn't matter what I think about that.
Yeah, that's a tautology.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
Right?
I don't know if that's a tautology, right? Because I don't think there's a formal system that's going to say nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, right? That's going to be something we arrive at sort of like discursively or empirically, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing contained within like the concept of moving and the concept of light that says that nothing can travel faster.
It's just a contingent truth. It's not a necessary truth.
Yeah, I mean, like tautologies are usually functions of like formal systems, right? Like a tautology is all you have to really understand about a tautology is just what the words mean, and you can tell that it's like true by definition. So like a bachelor being an unmarried man, you might consider that to be a tautology on that scheme because you actually don't need bachelors out in the world, and you don't even need people that are married out in the world. All you need is to understand what it means to be married and understand what the word bachelor means, and you can see that it's true that all bachelors are unmarried. But that being said, so we know what it means for something to be objectively true, but let's say that I say something like my favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla. Do you think that's objectively true, or would you take that to be subjectively true?
That would be a subjective opinion. I'm pretty sure that would be accurate, right? It's like vanilla is the best flavor. Isn't exactly, well, my favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla. Isn't exactly a truth claim. It's just as an opinionated claim.
Interesting. Do you think that it's like technically speaking true that if somebody like self-reports that their favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, it actually is the case that's their favorite flavor? Let's say they're like a really honest individual and they say,
Yeah.
my favorite. Okay.
Yeah, like my favorite ice cream is vanilla. Sure.
Gotcha.
That's a subjective truth claim.
And if it's actually the case that that person's favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, do you think that like people's stances or opinions can change that fact?
Like other people's? No. I don't think.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like by subjective you mean that like it's dependent on a subject, but it's not that the opinion is making it true. It's that something about what it is to be like a human being is making that thing true. Is that kind of
Sure. Like
what you're saying?
in that example, it's like the way that you say, I'm trying to say, like the way that you taste and kind of feel the taste of vanilla and how much you like it, how it feels off your taste buds will make it be your favorite. And that just because other people have a different opinion than you, that's not going to change the fact that you get the best experience when you're tasting vanilla.
Gotcha. What would you say if somebody said, well, I think it's just the case that like all these moral statements are probably just false, right? It's just going to be the case that, if I say, you ought not
All these small
beat Valerian's mom with a hammer, like, is it even possible for that to be true, do you think? Or maybe it's always false? Or do you think that maybe it's expressing something incoherent?
The way that, well, that's just because of the way that I see that your morality is developed is through the conditioning of the way that you were brought up. You know that it's objectively bad. You know that it is a bad thing to beat Valerian's mom with a hammer. Sorry. Because you were conditioned to not want to be violent towards others. And so it's very, very hard. It's possible, but it's very, very hard to change the conditioning that you were raised up into believing. It's really, really hard for me to believe all of a sudden that beating Valerian's mama with a hammer is okay. Like,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, like let's say that you and I were like standing in a room and we look out the window and we see Valerian's dad just laying a ass whooping on Valerian's mom because she made pasta instead of pizza, and we yell out from the window like, "Hey, did you know one of the facts about reality that's true in the same way that like, gravity is or terminal velocity is 32 feet per second squared in a vacuum. One of the things that's true about the universe in the same way that that's true is that beating people with a hammer is wrong." It seems unlikely the person will be like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, I guess I better stop.
Yeah, because like then you see like Valerian's dad has he was brought up to be whatever the reason is. He was clearly brought up differently than I was, or what me and you were looking out at the window. Me and you were looking out at the window with the believing that beating in your wife with a hammer is a bad thing, but Valerian's dad thinks otherwise, and he's had a very different experience of Valerian's mom, but
Well, we've all had a similar experience of Valerian's mom, but that's beside the point. Yeah, so I think that that's probably true. So I guess the interesting thing is, it sounds like we both reject true stance-independent moral facts. What I'm interested in is, what do you think is gained by the subjectivist thesis over just sort of saying, well, what's actually happening here is that moral propositions are all false. There's nothing out there that can make them true. Because that's my intuition, right? Is that actually there is no true moral propositions. But it sounds like you kind of think there are some. It just like kind of depends on the subject.
Yeah. Well, I don't believe that there is any one moral truth claim that is absolutely true. Like even like genocide is bad is not thing that you can prove, because I'll answer your question, is that I think that what is to gain from this is that first of all, it's more consistent with reality for a myriad of reasons. Like how everyone's this is a bold claim that I stand on, is that everyone's morality is different because if I were to ask you the question, I'm pretty sure everyone in this call and everyone in this server hopefully will say that murder is wrong. However, everyone Nair hates this, by the way, but everyone will have a slightly difference of opinion when I say how bad exactly is murder, Like if someone were to look at the same exact case where someone murdered someone else, they would say this guy deserves 20 years in prison, or like they might say this guy deserves life in prison, this guy deserves the death penalty, this guy deserves to be put off with a warning. That difference of opinion shows that the people's look, the way that people look at murder, which is a moral circumstance, right? Murdering someone else, is they all have a difference of opinion in some type of way.
Well, it sounds like they have a different of opinion on what the punishment should be, but there seems to be moral convergence that like it's true that murder is wrong. Because like right and wrong is kind of binary, right?
Justice is the punishment for moral wrongdoing, so it just stems from it.
Well, I'll actually I'll give you like something easy to chew on. I wouldn't say that murder is wrong because I think I think all moral propositions are false.
Wow.
What do you say? Well, all moral propositions are false.
Correct. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
There's nothing out. There's nothing out there that can make a moral proposition true, right? Because when we deal with propositions at all, right? You have this notion of something that can bear truth and something that can like make things true. Like commonly used truth bearers are going to be things like theories or sentences or beliefs, right? And a truth maker is going to be the thing that's like making that proposition true. So if I say my car is in my garage, right, that sentence there, that proposition is what's bearing the truth. What's making it true is that there's some state of affairs out there such that that hunk of metal that we've called a car is inside that brick structure that we call
all you have to do is deduce that there is no truth value in morality. And that's it. Anybody that disagrees with that is an irrational or bad faith actor. 100%. 100%.
I have no idea what you just said.
Because even if, well, I'm agreeing with you, that's what I just said. But even if they agree that morality is objective, in the long run, when you die and you get judged by God, essentially you can still have subjective morality coexist, in that humans develop their own justifications for moral reasoning, right? Also, check out that video on the side chat when you have time, Bubba.
Yeah, I will. Right now I'm focused with Josie. I've never spoken to Josie, but he knows everything about me, which is freaky.
True, yeah. I just have a really good memory. So, like, let's say that we take a moral proposition. It was pretty easy to understand what made the sort of everyday mundane proposition, like my car is in my garage. It was easy to understand what made that true. And it was easy to understand what was bearing the truth of that fact out there. But when I say something like, you ought not murder, right? What is making that proposition true?
The subject.
The subject.
The individual is saying it. You know that murder is wrong because it was the way that you were brought up.
But how... So if you have my car in my garage and we say that proposition is true, right? And then we go and we, like, check to see if that proposition is in fact true. We'll look at things like where my car is, whether or not it's in my garage, whether or not it's a car, whether or not it's my car. When you're trying to check if the moral proposition, you ought not murder, if we're trying to check whether that's true, what's the referent of the proposition that you're examining? Is it just the mental content of the subject?
Yeah. There's the... in psychology, you know what conditioning is, right?
Yep.
Just the way that you were conditioned, so it would be the current state of your mind at the time.
Do you think that there are objective facts about people's mental content?
Depends. Like, depends on the type of truth. Like, if I were to say that a person is mentally insane, that's actually... if you were to say that someone's clinically insane, then that could be... if you were to... based on these circumstances... these facts determine that this person is clinically insane. That's something that could be proven. If you were to, for example, measure the amount of drugs that are inside the person or how erratic their behavior is, then those are things that could be objectively true. But if I were to just say something that's much more broad, like, I don't know.
Well, like, we could actually take some of the philosophy out, or some of the science out of it and just like stay in the realm of pure philosophy. Let's say that you just have the ability to be perfectly acquainted with everything that it is to be like this particular human being. Presumably, like, their mental content, their brain states, all the relevant facts about their upbringing, all the conditioning that you brought up, all of those things, all those facts are going to be explained by something other than that agent's like perspective, right? They have a perspective, but what's ultimately explaining that individual and why they have the perspective they have is not their perspective itself, right? It's something outside that, because something needs to explain why they have a perspective in the first place, right?
That would be their own empiricism and rationalism that they're using to come to the state of their brain that they're at right now.
Yeah, and all of that is explained by what it is to have a brain and have, like, you know, neurons going off.
Yeah,
And what it,
firing, yeah.
And those facts are all objective, right? Like what it is to have a brain and have a brain that's firing a certain way, such that it produces certain kinds of mental content. Those are going to be like objective facts, right?
Yeah, the little things like that, like I have a brain in my head right now, is an objective fact. I have 2 eyes in my head as an objective fact.
Okay. And so if on this view, the moral proposition, murder is wrong, right? If what explains why that proposition is true is the subject, and every part of what it is to be that subject is explained by this ensemble of objective facts, then it sounds like this is not a subjectively true proposition. It sounds like this is an objectively true proposition.
How so? Because I ought not murder. It'd still be a thing with the same exact objective facts that we were talking about. Like, I have a brain inside my head. I have the ability to experience empiricism and rationalism, and I have a mind that is rational. All these things are objective facts that we could argue are in most or all humans, but they still come to a difference of opinion on murder, for example, or on self-defense, or owning a gun, or abortion. All these are moral truth claims.
And every single one of those differences in opinion is explained by presumably facts about that subject, right? All of which are objective, correct?
Yeah. I was like, I would just simply implore you to pick out one objective fact that we were talking about that separates a person who believes that murder is, I don't know, murder is okay and murder is wrong.
Murder is okay and murder is wrong. Let's see.
Like every person that is missing their left nostril thinks that murder is okay. Like something like or something less stupid than that, you know?
Yeah, so like that would be kind of interesting, because let's say that there was some reason to believe that every human being born without a left nostril believes that the moral proposition murder is wrong is true, right? Would you consider that to be a subjectivist thesis or like an objective thesis?
I would consider it to be an objective thesis, but like the fact is that's a pretty serious hypothetical that just
I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a pretty serious
But I think-
hypothetical. It just isn't real.
Yeah, but like that's making it really simplistic, because we're just like saying, oh, it's just whether or not you have a nostril. But the makeup of your brain, right, and the makeup of everything about you, right, and all the facts that informed and conditioned you, all of those things are more or less just a collection of nostrils, right? You either have them or you don't.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like we're talking like when we're talking about the way that your morality is formed, you would basically see some type of moral stimulus happen. Something happen, like maybe someone hits someone else, and then for whatever reason you feel good, bad, right, or wrong in whatever type of way. Then the types of chemical neurons that go out through your body will make you experience different things, like epinephrine or dopamine or testosterone. And some people will get more of those neurons than others, and that's why they will have what we're calling a difference of opinion, with their subjective morality.
And that difference in opinion is like is based on whether or not we consider that human being to be sort of operating at like peak biological rationality. Do you think that would kind of be a fair thing to say?
Depends on what you mean by peak, like peak biological.
Yeah, like you probably have some idea in your head what somebody who's being irrational looks like, right?
Sure.
Like somebody who's, on drugs, or somebody who's sleep deprived, or somebody that's just gone through an incredible like emotional loss in their life. We typically look at those people and we say, okay, they're not functioning at like peak rational behavior is going on here, right? So we kind of understand what that means. So like this is what I'll kind of submit to you, because you might actually kind of like this. There's going to be some number of moral realists, right, moral objectivists, that are just going to take objective moral facts to be more or less synonymous with sort of the rationality of actors on that view. This is going to be like a Parfit view or a Scanlon view. And this is kind of a cool view because you get to preserve all the cool parts of moral language, like saying X is wrong or X is right, because what you mean when you say X is wrong is that under normal circumstances, no rational agent would disagree. And it sounded like you brought up a similar example where you said, well, I think everybody on Discord would agree that murder is wrong. So it sounded like you were kind of almost appealing to that a little bit, right?
To the idea of what exactly? That, like...
What it means for something to be objectively wrong is that under normal circumstances, a properly functioning rational agent would be in agreement with all other properly functioning rational agents, right?
I'm so sorry, my wife was talking to me. Just can you summarize that one more time?
Yeah, so like on this particular view, it's going to be the case that when we're viewing things as being objectively wrong, what we're talking about is almost like a structure, and that particular structure is going to determine whether or not these individuals are functioning properly. And then when you have a circumstance where all agents are rationally functioning properly, then what they agree on is what we mean when we say that's objectively right or wrong. In the same way that if you understand all the rules of chess, you can understand exactly what it means to say that's the best move. Because no rational agent playing chess that desires to win would disagree that that's the best move.
Yeah, yeah, all makes sense.
Can I just ask a question? So in the chess analogy, the reason why they say it's the best move is because it's relative to some goal, right? So the goal is to win the game or to have a dominating position or like to make the opponent, whatever. So they have some goal X. So what would be the equivalent goal that you're trying to do with these moral facts? Would you say like, oh, minimizing unnecessary suffering or least imposition of will, or because that's like some of the models that I hear when I talk to atheists, right? So I'll just ask like, what's the goal that you're trying to achieve?
Those models are very similar to like virtue ethics, right? Which is that what moral systems should aim at is these particular goals, like the ones that you mentioned, like human flourishing or minimizing suffering and all that. The problem with those particular models is that they fall victim to what's sometimes called the open question argument, which is that if you come in front of me with any number of things that you say are good, I can just ask, but why are those the things that are good? And if you try to give me another reason, the question can just be reformatted and reapplied.
It's just an infinite regress, right?
Yeah. And so but that being said, rationality is the kind of thing that allows us to construct these models, right? And so if the kind of argument that's being made by these like Scanlon or Parfit style realists is that it's the rationality itself that's being used as the standard, not the products of the rationality, right? There's going to be an intuitional component as well there, but like somebody like Parfit might say something like, well, just by dint of being a rational human agent, there's just going to be some things that you can't desire, right? There's going to be some intuitive states, some motivational states, some conditions of desiring things that you just can't do, right? One of which could be something like no agent can willingly desire what they think is their own worst case scenario.
Yeah, like I agree with that. Like, for example, I can't just want to punch my mother in the face, and because it's something that I do not morally desire at all, because it's the way that I was conditioned, brought up, and all these things that we're talking about earlier. But a person who's a psychopath and an absolute, freak of nature, who is totally okay with punching their mother in the face, may find it's impossible for that type of person to desire to not want to, I don't know, a psychopath, cut into another person and play with their organs, like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah. Like that person probably thinks that cutting into that person or, abusing that other living being is not their own worst case scenario, which is why they do it, right? But what we don't see is people deliberately pursuing what they are, sort of presciently aware is what they believe is their own worst case scenario. They might do things that end up sort of like harming themselves, right? And sometimes harming themselves in a sort of ultimate fashion. But even then, they don't think that that's their own worst case scenario. They think that there's something worse out there. So it sounds like we have this sort of fact about what it is to be a human that's at the very least universal and might even qualify as like an objective moral fact, right?
Sort of. It's just an objective. What that would be based on, though, was you're trying to make an objective fact out of a subjective a subjective intuition. Like my intuitions are that I want to maybe raise a family, have some kids, and treat everyone well. Meanwhile, a psychopath may desire to kill and murder as many people as they want. While it is true that both those people want to, and all people would want to pursue their desires, however, their desires are all intuitively different. So it would still be based on a complete subjective impulse.
Well, what's shared in common between those two scenarios is that both of them, once again, are pursuing what they believe is better than their own worst case scenario, right? And so it seems like there's something about rationality. It might be the case that the way we interact with rationality might be in a subjective way because we are aware of our own interaction with it. But just because you have a hand, right, and what it is to have your hands is a deeply subjective experience, doesn't mean that it's a subjective fact that you have hands. I would submit that it's an objective fact that you have hands, right? Even if you stopped thinking that you have hands when you do, you'd still have hands, right?
Then that would be a different truth. We're not talking about an objective moral truth anymore. We're talking about an objective philosophical truth, which would be like everyone wants to pursue what they desire. That's not a moral truth claim. It's just like I have two hands in a subjective fact. I like having I should cut off my left hand and give it to a person in need. That's pretty much an ought claim, which is that's a moral truth claim. And those are just like.
Well, I would submit that when we're dealing with moral claims, we're dealing with sort of reflective, rationalized action, right? And so, like, because it doesn't make much, unless you think that morality is merely descriptive, which there's going to be plenty of people that do. But I take it that you probably think that, like, morality has a normative component. Like, what it means to use moral language is you ought do this, you ought not do that. And since actions, right, which is what's going to make those ought claims coherent on that view, since actions are sort of propelled forward by intuitions, beliefs, desires, and motivations, if there are objective facts about beliefs, desires, motivations, and intuitions, those are just going to be moral facts, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, they would be. It's the...
Okay. So it sounds like I've given you one stance-independent moral objective fact.
Which is?
No agent can willingly desire what they consider to be their own worst-case scenario.
Their own is still a... That's my thing, though, is that like you're using their own worst-case scenario. Since everyone's worst-case scenarios are subjective, then you're using a subjective, like, am I lost here? Because you're trying to...
No.
It's like...
Well, let's take like what gravity is. It's true that every object is falling, right, from like its own place in the universe. That doesn't mean that gravity is subjective, though. It's not dependent on the object. Like, gravity is like an objective fact, right?
Yeah, but the thing with the original, it doesn't work it's not analogous to the claim, because everyone is experiencing gravity differently, or in this analogy. It's like
well, gravity's acting on everything differently, right? But it's still an objective fact, correct?
No, actually, gravity is consistently the same strength throughout the entire Earth, 9.8 meters per second. And no matter if you're a floating cloud or a human being, gravity is the same throughout. But
there's going to be different particular facts about like what a cloud's constructed of, right? And what a rock is constructed of, such that rocks fall straight down to Earth and clouds hang around in the air. But that doesn't mean gravity's not still at work with the same constant sort of objective truth value, right?
And that's just still the reason it's not analogous is because there is no one universal worst case scenario for anyone. Even the most heinous moral thing that you could think of, like killing and eating your own mother. Like there's a couple psychopaths that would be indifferent. I won't even say that they would like it, but they would be indifferent about that type of thing happening.
But I mean, we can get to that in a second. But it does sound like you're at least amenable to the idea that it is true that whatever a human being thinks is their own worst case scenario, they cannot willingly, actively desire that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I think it's also consistent with the subjective morality.
Yeah, no, it could go in either direction. I'm just trying to give you like a little intuition pump, because if it's true that there are these objective facts about what it is to have desires, beliefs, motivations, intuitions, and if we call a properly operating human being in like terms of rationality, if we call that what we're dealing with when we use moral language, it sounds like a properly rational human being is going to be able to make a series of correct judgment calls on how they ought to behave, right? And it sounds like all of those judgment calls on how they ought to behave are all going to be explained by non-stance dependent things.
How so?
Because it sounds like that what it means to have beliefs, desires, motivations, intuitions, those things are explained by what it is to be a rational agent. And if there's some fact of the matter of what it means to be a rational agent, right, then that means that these, like, we could call them epistemic norms, are true, right? Like if I give you an argument that has like a valid form, you're kind of like obligated to believe the conclusion, aren't you? If I say all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, okay. And so if I give you a set of propositions like, no rational agent can willingly desire their own worst case scenario.
Yep.
This agent's worst case scenario is killing this person, therefore this person ought not kill that person. Do you think that you have an obligation to believe the conclusion of that argument, given your obligation to believe the conclusion of the previous one?
No. I think I'm not sure if you said that right, but I think you said that the agent wants to kill this person, therefore they should not kill this person. But,
sorry. They have it would be their worst case scenario if they kill that person.
Shut the fuck up, Naga.
It'd be their worst case scenario to kill that person.
It'd be their worst case. Okay, yeah, then they would not kill that
Bro,
person.
I'm just mourning, man.
Shut the fuck up.
So like it sounds like all you have to do then is kind of like fill in the blanks, right? If it actually is the worst case scenario for human beings to kill each other, right? Then all you need is a human being that's aware of its own worst case scenario, and that human being can now construct this valid sort of moral syllogism in their head, and that will spit out a validly deductively derived conclusion, and now they know what they ought to do.
Yeah, and this still completely lines up just fine with a intuitive moral system or subjective moral system that is based on each individual, because everyone has their own individual worst case scenario that they can't follow. Then like I also still don't see this as a I don't know if you're trying to assert that this is an objective truth claim that you're making. I don't think it is.
No. I'm just trying to get you on board with this idea of putting moral propositions into a syllogism.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
I'm trying to convert you into like a Kantian. But like, all right. So now here's the next step. And if I start to bore you, we can just stop here. But let's say that now we have a set of moral propositions that we want to put into these syllogisms, right? We want to have like a classic syllogism. It's going to have like a major premise, a minor premise, and it's going to have a conclusion. So like it would look something like stealing things in unjustified fashion is wrong. Taking my coworker's pen is stealing. Therefore, I ought not take my coworker's pen. And let's say that we have like evidence that the first premise is true. We have like moral intuitions, we have moral convergence, we have moral agreement, right? And we take these to be evidence in the same way that we have evidence that like gravity exists. If it's the case that we have evidence that the first premise in that syllogism is true, Do you think that we have reason to believe the conclusion of that syllogism?
If I believe that the first premise is true, then yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that we have good reason to think that moral propositions are true, given the 3 lines of evidence that I brought up?
That moral propositions are true.
Yeah, so like murder is wrong is a moral proposition, and like a moral realist might say, well, we have these lines of evidence that point to the truth of the conclusion. We have like moral intuitions. People have this powerful intuitive sense that they're doing something wrong, right, when they murder somebody. There's moral agreement. People agree on these things. It doesn't make much sense for them to be agreeing on X if there isn't a truth of the matter of X. And then we have moral convergence, which is that, or like moral progress, which is that generally speaking, people have sort of like coalesced around these particular propositions, like murder is wrong. In the same way they've coalesced around certain propositions, like vaccinating your child will make them healthier, right? And so, like, do you consider there to be like a good case to be made, given those lines of evidence?
Hardly, just because the syllogism that you put and the original claim that you are making is that no agent can desire what they consider to be their own worst case scenario. That syllogism would only be true if stealing is a part of a individual's worst case scenario. And that would only be true. And it doesn't have to be true. I could be someone that thinks that stealing is okay a lot of the time. And, so you can have, it's like individual objective truths is subjective, pretty much.
Sure. Yeah, this is less so to do with the kind of Parfait style realism, which is that like desiring their own worst case scenario. This is more just to do with like if I give you a proposition that I say is true, like vaccinating your child will make them healthier, and then I provide you evidence for that proposition's truth value. And let's say that evidence convinces you. And then I take this proposition that you're now convinced of the truth of, and I put it into this sort of like moral syllogism, and it spits out this conclusion. Do you think that that's a reason to believe that you have like found some true moral facts?
I just want to make sure what you mean when you say true moral facts. Like objectively
Murder
true,
is wrong.
or just like
yeah, objectively true. Like let's say it's true. One of the facts about the universe that's true in the same way that vaccinating your child makes them healthy is that unjustified killing is wrong. Those are like 2 facts about the universe, and we have like evidence for both of them. Like here's all my evidence for vaccines being healthy over here, and then here's all my evidence for unjustified killing is wrong over there.
And then that would only be true again. Just like I'm gonna sound like a broken, stubborn record here, but like that would only be true if I would accept it to be okay. Who's that talking? I can't see. That would only be true if I'm an individual who accepts that it would be a good thing for my child to be healthy, which of course we would all like that. But if I'm not a person who accepts that, and there are some psychos out there, then it wouldn't be true. Then the syllogism wouldn't work because you wouldn't accept P1.
Okay. I'm actually going to just agree with you there, because I think that categorical normativity is just false. But I think the interesting thing is that I think a lot of the case to be made for moral realism is actually going to be interacting with the kinds of things that we care about, right? Because it is just going to be the case that across the world, a lot of people have powerful intuitions about the truth value of moral propositions. And I don't know if you can really dismiss that just out of hand, right? And it is the case that there are people that disagree, right? But we generally don't take particular disagreements to be enough of a reason to rule out the truth of certain things. Like we don't say that colorblind people mean that there's no such thing as color, right?
Yeah, it's like, have you ever seen even a blind person? They just like.
Yeah, or like a blind person, like maybe a psychopath. Maybe a psychopath is just like somebody who's colorblind to morality, right?
They kind of are. They pretty much are.
Yeah, but that doesn't make color subjective, does it?
No, not exactly.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, because there's like those wavelengths are either the way they are or the way they aren't. But like I'll submit to you that like in this analogy, those wavelengths entering a normal functioning eye will produce the color, and states of affairs out in the world, going through like the eye of a moral person who's functioning properly, right? Those are going to be moral facts. So when I say that this tree is green over here, right? Since I have a properly functioning eye, those wavelengths enter the eye in such a way that I know that the tree is green. And in the same way, when I see my neighbor beating his wife, that enters my moral faculty, right? That's functioning properly, and I know that that's wrong. What do you think of that view?
Like, yeah, that's more or less how I see it. Yeah, that's like.
Okay, but that's an objectivist thesis, though, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Well, unless you think that color is subjective.
No, I don't think. Well, it's impossible to prove, but that's a different topic.
Sure, yeah.
Like I can't see.
But you take it there's objective facts about color, right? And what explains and what makes those facts objective is because there actually are wavelengths of photons out there, such that when they enter our eye, if our eye is functioning properly.
I was just being stupider than that. I was like, the idea that me and you can't, like, here's a red cube. I can't prove to you that I'm looking at the same color red as you are.
Sure, yeah, I gotcha.
But with I failed to see, and I'm probably just confused on what you mean by like how this is an objectivist thesis.
Well, because in the same way that as long as the wavelengths of light are entering a properly functioning eye, then it's going to just be objectively true that that tree is green over there, right? And we wouldn't say, if it was the case that the eye wasn't working properly, we wouldn't say the tree isn't green anymore. We would say that that person's eye is broken. And in the same way, just because people have different views on murder doesn't mean that murder is wrong, isn't objectively true. It just means that person's moral faculties are broken.
Yeah. And and this is actually an argument that I considered because of the way that I look at psychopaths. I thought that I would look at psychopaths as people that were just conditioned to have difference of morality, because when you look at Jeffrey Dahmer, I use him as a case study because he was brought up to be aroused by gutting into just like animals and whatnot by his dad. And he so I would argue that conditioning, like psychopaths are conditioned to be psychopaths, and I would stand on that, but I've had that idea kind of challenged a little bit, and I just haven't come to a satisfying conclusion at the moment. Is that what I think it is?
Yeah, I mean, like it's kind of in this. It's kind of like in the same way that, I mean, Nick's agnostic on whether or not explosion is true, so I don't know why he's posting an argument that relies on explosion. But anyway, if you take it to be the case that like you can damage somebody's moral faculties, right? Like let's say that like children are raised in a terrible fashion, such that we won't even talk about the moral stuff at first. Let's talk about like the eyesight thing. Let's say that like my father beats me every day and he like manages somehow to consistently strike the parts of my brain and the parts of my orbital bone such that it basically renders me colorblind. And then I go out into the world and I can't see color anymore. If it's the case that there's still objective facts about color, even though my ability to perceive color was damaged from birth, and if it's the case that we're using that as like an analogy to psychopathy, it seems like it's relatively intuitive to say that no, there still are objective moral facts. It's just that this particular person had their ability to perceive moral facts literally beaten out of them by some states of affairs in the world. Do you think that that's like an okay analogy to draw?
Yeah, it's fair. And the thing is, the thing that I haven't looked into is whether or not a person who is basically blind to morality is whether or not that would be something that was like what we're discussing, like it was something that was literally beat out of them, like they just don't have the ability to morally feel anything because it was a case of the product of their raising, or if it was a genetic thing that they just were simply born with, like being blind.
Sure.
And
or being born with some like impairment in their brain.
Yeah, like if there's here's the court case, right? If the evidence is that it's something wrong with their brain, their wiring, like so it would probably be in the frontal lobe. Then if there's something wrong with their frontal lobe, then that would be a strong case for an objective morality. However, if it's totally the conditioning of the brain thing, then that's a strong case for subjective morality. Which I haven't looked into it. I've been gone from home for a week.
Yeah, you're fine. I mean, I'll give you another intuition pump. I mean, one of the things that we've actually discovered a lot about PTSD over the years is that people are actually pretty good at surviving traumatic experiences, but what gives them PTSD is usually, if you like ask them, it's not that they just suffered a really bad experience, it's that they suffered a bad experience at the hands of somebody that they realize meant to do it. That's usually what gives people really, really bad PTSD. It's not that something like happened to them, like they broke their leg, right? It's not that something happened like, their car got a flat tire. It'll be something like maybe somebody got like a hit and run on them and broke both of their legs and then drove off and like wasn't held responsible. That might give somebody PTSD because it's not just that they suffered, it's that somebody like kind of meant to harm them, right? And so, like, we have this idea that when we're looking at, like, what's good and what's evil out in the world, if we're using moral language, it really seems to be linked to whether or not that person's kind of, like, in control of what they're doing, right? And then we look at people who are, quote-unquote, in control, and we assign, like, this broken status to them. Like, we look at psychopaths and we say, like, oh, that person's, like, morally broken, right? And that really bothers us when we encounter morally broken people so badly that it we continue to self-harm over it, which is essentially what PTSD is. We're continuing to self-harm over somebody else who already harmed us, right? So I think that's another intuition pump, that what it means, but again, that's consistent with there being objective moral facts and just occasionally you interact with broken subjects. But interacting with broken subjects doesn't mean the thing with respect that they're broken to is subjective. It means that that person's broken, right?
How do you put that into how do you use, what's it called, PTSD as a example for that? A person who
that's just like an intuition pump. It's like when we think about what causes our sort of moral intuitions to fire, right? One of the things that really seems to bother human beings is when they suffer like a traumatic experience at the hands of somebody who actually meant to do it, right? So it's like, and we view like when a psychopath harms you, right? That's somebody that we consider to be like morally broken. When a psychopath harms you, it does more damage than if you were harmed by somebody who wasn't a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
Generally, roughly speaking, if you look at like the clinical literature on people that are heavily suffering from PTSD, like one of the reasons why when you look at like the PTSD rates between like soldiers, you would think that like the people that are in like special operations have the most PTSD because they're in combat the most. They're not. The people that really, really have trouble with PTSD are the cornbread motherfuckers that like go to the Middle East and their Humvee rolls over an IED and their 3 friends die. Right? Those are the people that really suffer from PTSD because you have somebody that suffered a traumatic experience and you have this additional component of somebody who's morally broken meant to do it to them, right? And that seems to like really fire off our like quote unquote moral intuitions. We really care about that. It like really bothers us. Like, oh, this person meant to harm me. It's not that they just like backed into me and didn't see me and stepped on my foot. It's that they turned around and like because I was standing behind them, they threw a drink in my face. Like for no reason, right? Other than the fact that they're like morally deranged. So that's just kind of like an intuition pump that it seems like moral intuitions are like really a feature of how we behave and interact with people. So I'm kind of using that as evidence that there are objective moral facts out there, and just because we come across broken people, morally speaking, doesn't mean those facts aren't objective, but found individual broken subjects.
And I don't think that that's a tie to say, because of these objective moral facts, people suffer from these people are suffering from this PTSD.
I'm not saying it's because. I'm using it as an intuition
yeah.
pump, right? Do you know what I mean when I say intuition pump? Out of curiosity.
A intuitive, as yes,
like a thought experiment.
Yeah. Just pretty much.
Yeah, I'm not trying to correlate two things, right?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say this happens because of that. What I'm saying is that it seems like the way that one of the things that sends our moral intuitions into a tizzy is when we encounter people that we view as like morally broken, right? But in order for somebody to be like morally broken, this seems like there has to be some function there that we're aware of that would be operating normally,
Also,
right?
how would a regular person consider another person to be morally broken? Are we just talking a psychopath, or just like generally speaking? Because morally broken can just mean a person who has the exact opposite morals as I do. And
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, it could be just somebody who like disagrees. But I think that normally when we talk about morally broken people, we consider people like people that have really, really bad like narcissistic personality disorders that are very Machiavellian, that take advantage of people with like no visible remorse, that are very selfish and self-centered, people that will physically harm other people for their own benefit, like physical bullying or something like that. Generally speaking, most people's kind of moral intuitions are against that. Like if you just look at the way that we like portray those people in like movies or popular cinema or in books and all that, they don't have to explain to you in like the opening scene of A New Hope that Darth Vader's the bad guy. Everyone knows he's the bad guy within the first 60 seconds. Why do they know he's the bad guy? Because he's choking people to death, right? And so it's like it's those kind of moral intuitions that we have go off very, very quickly and very, very consistently, right? So I think that's what most people will mean when they say morally broken.
okay, and then I'm glad that you brought up Darth Vader. Actually, would Darth Vader consider Jedi to be morally broken?
Would Darth Vader
Under
consider
that
Jedi to be
definition as
morally
well?
broken? Probably. Yeah, I think that like that character thought that they were like insanely corrupted and were trying to like murder somebody who was bringing hope to the galaxy.
And I know we're getting into the semantics of like the character of Darth Vader, but however, thing is, Darth Vader, I don't think that he believes that the reason that he doesn't like the Jedi isn't because he has ulterior. I don't want to get like into the plot of Star Wars, but the reason that he doesn't like the Jedi isn't because of their moral system. It's because of personal reasons, or what's it called? Like he has that outgoing motive. What's it called?
Yeah.
Ulterior motives to not like the Jedi.
But within the context of Star Wars, do you think that Darth Vader was like incorrect about some of the things that he thought?
Yeah, as well.
So, like, if Darth Vader is wrong about some of the things that he thought, and he reached moral conclusions based on erroneous information, that doesn't really mean that there's not objective moral facts. It means that he reasoned badly, right?
I was gonna make an argument, but it wasn't very strong. It's just that something's happening on my screen. Sorry.
Because, like, I think that what's interesting here is that we have this notion of morally broken, and we also have this notion of, like, somebody who just reasons badly. But just because somebody, like, reasons badly doesn't mean there's not objective, like, mathematical facts. Like, just because someone's really bad at math doesn't mean there's not, like, objective mathematical facts. And just because somebody is a psychopath doesn't mean there's not objective moral facts, right?
The reason that I use to explain as to why I believe that there's something happening on my screen. I'm a little distracted. But the reason that I use to explain as to why I think that the existence of psychopaths is a strong case for a subjective morality. Like subjective morality is more consistent with reality. Is because, give me 2 seconds. Is that the idea that everyone has this moral code. The idea that everyone has this moral code written on their hearts, which is typically a theist argument. Like God wrote his moral code onto all of our hearts. It's like 2 Corinthians 3:3. It's probably some other things as well. But psychopaths are people who are conditioned, or I say conditioned, but it could be something else. I haven't come to a conclusion yet. It's people that basically go against that objective moral code that we're talking about. And since there are people that are able to go against what we would call an objective moral law, then that Leafy, you're hot micing. Then that must mean either everyone except for a few people have an objective moral code, or is that everyone has a general moral code, not an objective moral code, just more of a general one that that the time and place of the society that they were born into follows, and psychopaths, what we would call them, are the ones that go outside of that general moral code, which is a stronger case for subjective moral, which is a cleaner explanation as to the existence of psychopaths, and also and directly against, or just really shaky for an objective worldview, for an objective worldview.
Yeah, I mean, there's two, I think, answers to that, and they both go in like different ways. One of them is that you're right. It's like, what is it that is actually making these things true? Because like if I have two doors, right, and one of them is like locked and made of steel, and the other one is open, but it has a sign that says it's wrong to walk through doorways. If I try to run through the first door, I'm just going to bounce off, right? Because I can't walk through steel, and there's just laws of physics that prevent me from going through there. But if I come up to the second door and I don't give a fuck about what that sign says, I can just walk through that door. And so it seems like these moral facts are like powerless to stop me unless I care about them. So that's a really good argument, actually. In the other direction, there's going to be a particular moral view called particularism, no pun intended, which is that there's just never going to be universal categorical moral laws, right? Every single situation is going to be appraised differently. But that being said, you could still be like some kind of strange particularist objectivist that thinks that there's stance-independent moral reasoning that can be used in every single particular situation that it applies to, which you might actually be amenable to, right? Yeah. Like the subjective thesis kind of straddles in between. Like they take some things from error theory and they say some things about like the truth makers of moral statements, and then they also kind of borrow a little bit from the objectivist thesis when it comes to like how we like use our moral rationality. And so I guess there's just you don't have to commit to subjectivism. You could commit to like stronger views on either side. Not that subjectivism is a weak view, but just that you could overcommit in like one particular direction. But I think that like you might like some of those views a little bit more based on some of the stuff that you've said so far, especially given the fact that like subjectivism gets a bad rap.
Yeah, it's just if we're gonna talk particularism, I don't think it's as consistent with reality. It's just because there are, like, don't get me wrong, if we were to say like some of the things that we would say are objectively true, such as murder, if we were just to change that to, in general, murder is bad, but you know, like if a dude punches my mother in the face right in front of me and I have a gun in my hands, who's to say what happens? That's basically particularism. Then the reason I don't think it's as consistent with reality is because of the existence of war. I don't think that there's a single thing about going to war. I don't think it's ever okay for
You think you could never justify going to war?
No, I don't think you can. Under particularism, it's just the way that I was gonna put it didn't make sense, so I have to kind of fall back on what I was saying originally.
Well, I mean, most particularists are just going to agree that there's no like universally consistent moral principles, right? They're never going to be universal. That's kind of just like, you can take that just from the name of the theory, right? Like they don't care about any universal principles. They think that every single situation is going to have to be appraised independently.
And the thing is, though, like a general moral ethics and moral ideologies, they're essential for moral education and learning, and they help people like develop a coherent moral framework on just like to understand how to apply this and that. So if you throw in like, it's always a bad thing to murder. It's always a bad thing to murder, except for all the times where it's okay to murder. It's not very practical, which isn't a very strong argument against it. It's just like, I think that from the I've also
Yeah, the particularist thesis on something like that would be that universally speaking, you should never murder is not going to be a defensible moral principle. However, there could be a particular situation where understanding what it means to kill somebody and understanding what it means to give a justification for it, you could extract like a categorical imperative using the circumstances of that situation, right? Like a hypothetical imperative rather. Like the categorical imperatives don't have any antecedents. Like a categorical imperative is just don't murder, right? Like never. You can never do it. Whereas like a hypothetical imperative is if X, Y, and Z, then you shouldn't murder, right? So like if it's likely you'll get caught and that person, and it'll make you really sad if you kill them, and it's unlikely that you'll succeed, then you can extract this like hypothetical imperative that you shouldn't kill them.
Yeah, like
right?
at that point, like if you're like at that point, how would the law work? It's how would you develop a law under a moral particularism viewpoint? Like,
Well, our legal systems all basically run on moral fictionalism, right? Which is like this commitment to moral realism, and they don't really care whether or not it's true. Right? Like legal systems are either presuppose moral realism or they just kind of like act like it's true, right? Because like that is kind of what we do. We like most legal systems in like the Western world use some kind of like moral naturalism, and in particular they use like virtue ethics, which is that legal systems are committed to these like notions about justice and what government's responsibility to their people is, right? And then they extract legal principles from that. So interestingly enough, I don't know what a subjectivist-based moral or legal system would look like. It probably look really strange, wouldn't it?
It would Yeah, this is why I actually dislike. This is something I've said to a couple people, but I actually dislike the worldview of being a subjective moralist because I agree that it basically holds everyone to fend for themselves and do to others as they treat you, which is then that's open to a lot more fighting.
Yeah.
If everyone really, really, really did follow not moral realism, but instead just moral relativism, then we really would be at each other's throats. But we don't live that way.
Yeah, and the subjectivist thesis is kind of like has to remain silent on that because according to the subjectivist thesis, there's a bunch of simultaneously true moral propositions, right?
Well, not that there's several true ones. There is no true ones. There's no true.
Oh wait, hold on.
Oh, sorry. It's like only true to the individual. So like.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Wait. So the moral so the subjectivist thesis is that there are true moral propositions. It's just that what makes them true is the participation of the subject, right?
Yeah.
If you're saying there's no true moral propositions, that's not a subjectivist thesis. That's actually an error theory, right? Which is what I think is the case.
Oh yeah, I was saying that because I was remembering a conversation that I had last week where I just jumped into a call and then someone asked me, who knew I was a moral subjectivist, and asked me, Bubba, are there any moral truths? And I said, no, and that's why I said that.
Based. Yeah. And the best part is the error theory position can actually interact with the legal system because they can say, well, it is the case, right, that there are no true moral propositions. All moral propositions are false. But we do have these rich social environments, right, where people have desires and intuitions and beliefs and motivations. And we can construct these formal systems, right? And then we can commit to the sort of facts about those formal structures, and then we can create this legal system. And that legal system is going to be reflective of people's desires, which I think is accurate. I think that maps onto the way the world is. I think if you look at somebody's legal system, you're actually getting a snapshot of what the people that created that legal system desire, right?
I want to.
Like if you look at Western legal systems, I think that you can tell pretty quickly what Western people desire when they created that legal system.
Not that I want to end the conversation, but I do want to end on this topic because I've been recording this whole time and it's been an hour and 3 minutes long. My computer's gonna explode. But the way that I think that the world basically works is that everyone does have a subjective morality, whether they know it or not. However, we function in society as if there is objective, or what is it like? there is moral realism at the very least in the world. Like, we know that murder. We say that we know that murder is wrong all the time. That rape is wrong all the time, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But
we're fictionally committing to it in the same way that I'm saying that, like, Tony Stark has like this many Iron Man suits. Like, that's not true, right? But I'm committed to facts about Iron Man, right?